might want to serve on the Parks and Rec Board?
So I'm excited to be here. As you know, as you can probably read on my application, I do have an undergrad in Parks, Recreation, Tourism Management, Community Program Management. I worked in the field for kind of a small amount of time until I switched to education. So the last 15 years I've been in education as a teacher, and then most currently a library media specialist in Gaston County Schools. So I think when you go through and you do the education programs in Parks and Rec, and you're in the organizations, you just truly have a passion for it. And I've spent the last 10 years essentially raising young children. My oldest is 10 now. And we've done the Parks and Rec programs with her, and also my 5-year-old, and I've helped coach his soccer team through the Belmont Parks and Rec, and so I've they're getting a little bit more independent, and I thought what a great opportunity to apply to serve in this capacity.
So you said you worked in the field of your undergraduate degree for a little bit before you transitioned to education. What sort of work did you do when you were in sort of Parks and Rec and tourism management?
So I was the recreation program assistant for the town of Garner, up in outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. Essentially, I kind of did a little bit of everything. I helped the athletic director. I helped the program director. In the community center, I helped with summer camps. I helped with the sports. A little bit of anything and everything, lining the fields, putting the marketing out there, the brochures. I did that.
You lined fields?
Pardon?
You lined fields?
I lined fields. Well, in this field, you just, when you show up,
That's swapped.
Yeah.
This field, when you show up, you never know what you're going to do for the day to get, everything ready, which is, part of the reason why it's a really fun thing. And so then I worked for the Still Creek YMCA as the youth program director there, and I ran their after school and summer camps before switching over to education.
So as a parent whose children participate in rec programs, I was just wondering what your perspective is on sort of the leagues themselves. I feel like we've done a lot of big ticket items like the rec center, obviously, and various facilities, but I wonder about the experiences in the actual leagues themselves in terms of like organization and scheduling and that sort of thing, how you feel that is currently working and whether there could be any improvements.
So we've had a very positive experience in the town of Belmont with doing soccer. My son has done t-ball. My son has done soccer. My daughter has done soccer. It's a big job. I mean, Brian has a very big job, and recruiting those volunteers, and it all really kind of depends on getting those volunteers, and it's not a one-man job per se. So it's kind of actively recruiting the volunteers and the community and the parents to it's only as big as the community is going to you can recruit the community to make it be. So we've there's the coaches have always been fantastic. Scheduling there's little tweaks and honestly, when I think about it, probably some of if you really trace back, maybe not getting communication a little bit late, but it's waiting on a volunteer. We have a team, but we're waiting on a volunteer to coach that. But once we get the volunteers, the coaches have always been great. The scheduling has been great. I know we've been at Belmont Central for the basketball facility, and that's been very nice. So we've just had a very overall positive experience, and I know that's a big job in this community, organizing those leagues.
Well, I think one of the benefits to having that facility is to have when we're able to have our leagues in that facility, as opposed to I used to work for my recreation department where I grew up, and we had our basketball leagues in the schools before we redid our civic center, and it was we were always walking that edge. We had like youth, teenagers, all the way up to men and women, and you just never knew, like, if there was an incident at a school where the school's going to throw us out and we wouldn't have anywhere to be for the league. Sometimes you'd come to, the next day and the gym would be missing or something like that. And, so I as a former recreation worker, you might be able to appreciate that I think it'll help the leagues a lot to be able to have one central facility instead of having to schedule at the whims of the school system.
It was, and you know, the staff was very good. You know, you'd see them there opening the doors, making sure it was ready. You know, when if you would get there early, you know, kind of like they do with the parks as well, like you know the actual the play structures in our community. Well, my daughter played for Cramerton with some friends, Cramerton Parks and Rec basketball. You know, they have their own facility, and I thought to myself, it's going to be really nice, you know, when this facility opens up, you know, and they have that, you know, it was, you could see the positive of having their facility there.
I was thinking of the time that the adult team waited in the school parking lot for the last game and then beat up the ref who yeah, Dearborn Recreation Department was a little bit different than we have down here, but
Well,
yes.
they do a good job with their children here.
Yes. Yes.
They do a great job.
So let me ask you your background with the YMCA and in Garner. Does it solely focus around athletics, or what other types of programming were you involved in? Because we have had moving Mondays and things for the smaller, intermediate age kids, which I think has fallen off a little bit. But you know, have you had any experience with that in Belmont? I think they still offer some of that.
In Belmont, so my daughter did that was back in 2017, 18. They offered the summer camps for the little ones. I think it was 4 and 5. They stayed in the current community center off of close to downtown. And the older kids at that time, they were taking on like a day field trip.
Yeah.
So we have done, and they did the gymnastics. You know, they're offered the gymnastics and the dance. You know, it's very big at that time as well too. So in Garner, we did. So they actually had a gymnasium. And so they had a lot of kind of adult programming where they would do, sometimes they would do plays. They would do, they just did kind of a lot of various things. They would have just flutes. I mean, it was just random things, adult programmings that would come in. And I think it probably just depends on what your community needs at that time for that area, you know, assessing your community and staffing and you know what is available. So we have at the YMCA, I did mainly sports and after school. I did a few like Mother's Morning Out, a few programs like that, you know, where I've led, you know, the programs in the gym where it's just 30 minutes where we go and do the parachutes and I think probably for Belmont, some of that will probably come when you have the facility, you know, to do those Mother's Mornings Out with the tots or, you know, different. You have the facility there to do some of that.
I think we
that
had
0
that
to
one,
99 up programming, you know.
Yeah, we had Mother's Morning Out when my kids were little. That was enormously popular. You had to get there early to sign up early for that.
It is nice, and you know, we did it at the library, the Belmont Library when my son was little. You know, they offered that at the library. So, and it's you know, it's the reading and the bubbles at the end, but it you know, it would be you know, at the time there wasn't anything that I know of that wasn't kind of more you know, physical education based like that. But you know, I know when my son, I know there probably in this community would be a high need for something like that to get the kids active in a Mother's Morning Out or Mommy and Me.
My sons love the bubbles.
Yeah,
so,
I mean the bubbles at the end was.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's their favorite part.
The librarians would read the books, but at the end she'd have a bubble machine that would just blow bubbles
And they
everywhere.
just play
as the
music
kids
and
leave.
run around.
It hooks you. You come back.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. No, but I think there's a real need for that sort of like under 5 age group. It's very hard to find stuff for them to do, especially during the summer, because everything that they would be doing is closed. So, yeah, but I think this opens up some opportunities in that department.
Belmont does a great job. It's the parks are we use the parks. You know, I see them out there inspecting the parks when we go early morning in the summertime. There's always someone there inspecting them early morning. You know, there's just a lot of free space where you go to the parks and people are just walking their dogs or sitting and visiting. And you know, sometimes it's not just programming; it's just offering space. You know, that I think this community does a very good job.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Summer. Appreciate that. Okay. Tiffany, you ready?
So the next round will be before the July 12th. Do we want to change that? So many people.
Oh, is that mine?
Well, are we able to go ahead and vote tonight on the ABC board since there's no other future applicants for it?
Oh.
Just
No,
to
there
go ahead
are-
and get.
they're on
there
here.
is.
Back. I did the same thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Never mind.
But, I mean, do we want to reappoint the people that are already on the board? I mean, we usually
Yeah, I
do that
think
anyway.
Jonathan Wilson's an asset to the ABC board. If we want to go ahead and get that one off the.
Well, yeah, because I was thinking maybe him,
And
the Board of Adjustment.
and the
ESB.
ESB.
Yeah.
Yeah, she also just sitting Maria. She offers a lot of input and stuff like that through those meetings.
Is that appropriate to do that, or? Yeah.
So can we just
I mean,
just make a motion?
Our past policy was to hear all the applicants and interviews before making any appointments, but I'm just pointing that out. We can do what we want.
Well, then do we want to wait?
I don't know.
That was
I think
unclear.
we might as well just wait until everyone's. I don't know, if I were an applicant and somebody had already been appointed before I even got to interview, I might, even though it's our typically we reappoint, I don't think there'd be any reason why we wouldn't reappoint any of these folks, but I think we at least need to hear people before.
That's fine.
Are any of their terms like expiring to the point?
Well, so all of them are currently still serving.
Right.
The only one that is, so even Jonathan Wilson, we're trying to get all of their board terms to expire around the same time of the year. His was technically in December, so we're moving to July to conform with everybody else's.
Okay.
He actually, his current goes to December, we're just kind of moving and gets his term to go June, July.
Okay.
Maria, I don't think there's an issue with continuing to serve in either with Donald Butler until they're being reappointed, but there is a vacancy for the ABC board that they're very anxious to fill. So that's why we're trying to really get these stuff in July.
Okay, makes sense.
So do we want to do, since Martha and Mark are going to be here in July, do we want to move it to the workshop?
Is everyone? Well, I know Richard said he wasn't going to be here.
I won't be at the workshop in July either.
So it's two of you either.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do you want to keep it in July?
Yeah, I don't feel like we can't move it, right? We need to go ahead and get this
I
stuff
think you
done.
need to go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
Whether we're here or
I mean,
not.
certainly,
We've been pushing it
Yeah.
back.
if you all have any thoughts that you'd like to
Yeah, just
share with us.
Just at Charles Hill with that background in Cramerton, I think we need to seriously.
I think he's going to be a major asset as well.
I agree.
Yeah, that would be the only thing I'd say.
Thanks, Alex. I know this is always taxing.
Oh, we did that earlier.
Yeah. There you go.
It's just so strung out. So we're trying to get it on better.
I just got that one. That was a good one. Been a long day.
Yeah, it's only going to continue.
What do you mean it's only going to come into?
Well, we've still got some things on the agenda. Well, I bet people didn't plan on talking about some other things for as long as we did, so, you know.
Oh, that's right. We got two more things.
Yeah.
Well,
All right.
Tiffany, give it a rod.
Oh, that was it. We're going straight to closed session.
Oh, that's right.
That's quick.
We amended the order, sorry.
Right, yeah.
Right there.
Okay, perfect.
So, as you may recall, at our last meeting, there was some discussion related to the path forward for council's direction to staff to look at a text amendment that would allow for additional housing options, specifically senior and supportive housing, to be considered in areas other than the highway commercial and institutional campus development zoning designations. And so what I was hoping to get is a discussion here tonight on a direction that staff should take in terms of drafting a text for your consideration. And so I would like to present two options. These certainly there may be others. I'd love to hear from you, but when I was looking at the direction and some of the topics that we've talked about lately have come to the forefront from the planning department's perspective as maybe some of the two routes forward that might be the most helpful in our current situation. So I'd love to hear some feedback from you on either one of these approaches. So option one would be more of a traffic-focused approach, and this would be to consider allowing projects with anticipated trip generation, utilizing the ITE manual that we currently utilize for trip generation. Anything that offers anticipated trips less than land use category 220, which is what they use for multifamily housing that's 2 to 3 stories in nature, which is pretty consistent with what our land development code allows for in terms of height for multifamily development. And this category 220 is specifically for those locations that are not close to rail transit, as we don't yet have rail transit here in our community for commuters. That would apply in all areas of the city. In option one with this approach, it would allow for apartment building forms specifically that had these reduced trip volume generated counts to still go through the process, but utilizing conditional zoning. And we would seek to potentially ask for your consideration in zones that where it was allowed previously, right? So that would be neighborhood center residential, neighborhood center commercial, downtown district, traditional neighborhood development, as well as business campus development. Just as it was previously, we would not recommend introducing the apartment building form in the general residential or suburban residential zones. And so this would be one option, again, would be focused on traffic. And just to kind of visualize that a little bit, I apologize for the small text. So look at your closest screen on this. And certainly we can delve more into it if this is the approach you would like us to research further. But I did reach out to Kimley Horn, our transportation consultant, and asked for him to help me with a little bit of basic research here. So that land use category 220, as you see there, is the multifamily housing, low rise, again, 2 to 3 floors in height. And you see what I did is had him run an example of 100 units. So if any of these land categories were utilized with 100 residential units, what would the anticipated trip generation volumes be, both daily, during the AM peak hour and the PM peak hour? And then in the last column on the right, what you can see is I just ran some basic percentage math utilizing the daily numbers. We could do more complex analysis if this is direction that is favorable to council. But we can see here that affordable housing projects that have income limits generally produce 71% of the anticipated trips as a standard multifamily housing development. And that ranges. Affordable housing for seniors goes down to 18% of that volume. You can see here things like congregate care facilities is generally 30% of what would an average apartment multifamily use would generate. And they range. And we could look at as little or as many of these use types as you would feel appropriate. But by just, we could have the language as broad as just saying anything that has a trip generation less than your typical could come through for consideration utilizing the conditional zoning process. And then each project would be vetted on a site-by-site basis for whether or not that specific location could support the traffic generated by the proposed development. Again, this is just data with a 100-unit example, so it's not location specific in this chart and isn't utilizing any more honed-in data source, but hopefully can provide you a snapshot example of this type of approach for your consideration. And this would be potentially in as broad as all areas of the city. This could be considered. Okay, I meant to amend this slide to say option 2, so I apologize about that. Option 2 would be taking an area-based approach, and this would be to allow consideration of apartment building forms within the Center City Small Area Plan, which is outlined in our comprehensive land use plan. If this boundary changed, the reference would be to the small area plan itself, so it would inherently change with any updates we would make to our comprehensive land use plan that are envisioned in the future. And again, these projects would be envisioned to come before you through the conditional zoning process for consideration. This approach would be to look at strategically promoting density in our center city core in order to encourage residents to walk downtown rather than drive or park to the nearby amenities being offered in that location, and would balance out with the recently approved reduction in density on the peninsula. So really being more strategic about where we want density here in Belmont and where we don't want density here in Belmont. This could also be envisioned in addition to the center city small area plan within our envisioned village center areas, which we have in our 2018 comprehensive land use plan, and we could adjust in the land use plan update as well. And so just graphically having a map for your consideration here as well, you see the center city small area plan extending down past Dwight Frady Field and then going down and into Central Avenue. And that's located again in our center city core. And then the village center areas are on the right, and those are circled here in yellow. So you see we have quite a few of them. But again, as a reminder, in our comprehensive land use plan, these village centers are only envisioned to occur if and when the transportation network that's surrounding is put in place. And so you do see some that are centered around the Catawba Crossings project. Since that roadway infrastructure is not in place yet, we would not envision commercial development or those village center developments to pop up until infrastructure is put in. That being said, a smaller scale could be put in, and as is proposed in the Pt.2 and 3 tract of land that's been filed but not yet approved, there is a small village center with the introduction of the new roadway that would be a part of that development project. But commercial growth is dependent on transportation to access to and from. And so that plan for the village centers and the density, utilizing conditional zoning, would allow for staff to have input, but most importantly, city council to have input on when the timing for that development and growth would be the most appropriate. And those are my two options for your consideration. And I would love to hear any feedback or direction from council to help me draft something further for review and analysis.
Well, let me ask you, just the first thing that occurs to me is the steering committee was talking just about this the other night about density in downtown.
Sure.
So are we getting the cart before the horse here by us giving you direction before the steering committee has had a chance to formulate an opinion on what they were talking about, particularly density downtown? Because, you know, some were very adamant that that's what they wanted to see.
Sure. I wouldn't say it's a cart before the horse just because I think the conversations are two separate ones, but related ones. And so the steering committee is the Housing Choices Work Group that's really looking at that missing middle component in terms of the size and scale that's most appropriate for multifamily housing development. What's nice about both of the proposals that I'm seeking direction on here is that all of them would be through conditional zoning. So as we hear more from that committee, it would allow that input to inform any future decisions that are being made. But at the same time, it would still allow for anything to be filed and brought to city council for their review and consideration. And in both approaches, we could do one, we could do the other. I can attempt to try to merge or overlay them. It really is to your direction, but in both, the goal would be to give you all the maximum flexibility to allow projects to proceed to you that offer opportunities for supportive or senior housing or a combination thereof.
Well, I mean, obviously we can't focus on just one, but if I understand the concern to wait and see what the steering committee recommends, but I also recall that when discussion of senior housing in certain areas was mentioned during public comment, that there was some discussion about trying to the timing and how long that would take, considering that no such project could go forward under the land development code as currently well, I shouldn't say that, but it would not be supported, it would not be consistent with the comprehensive land use plan, and it could not be supported by staff under the current code. Is that?
That is correct. We do have one project that has filed a sketch plan for staff's review and consideration. And based off of the current adopted code in place, that project would not be able to be supported. And as was shared in a previous meeting and is public record because it's now been filed, that would offer a senior housing or assisted living facility on the Park Street United Methodist Church campus, which is located at Keener and Catawba, right
In the
adjacent
center
in
city
downtown.
small area.
It is in the Center City Small Area Plan. It is also at a transportation node. And both options would allow for consideration of that project if you so choose. And again, there might be other options as well. But both of the ones, based off of direction that staff received, would accomplish the goal to find an option that would allow for your consideration of that application.
Shouldn't the steering committee be focused on the middle part of missing middle rather than, like, I mean, if they're already going off and looking at apartment development, I think they've completely misunderstood their mandate there.
They are not, to be clear.
Okay.
They are really focusing on introducing housing types and which housing types would be appropriate that are not currently found in our land development code. So because apartments are currently identified and outlined in our land development code, that is beyond the scope, although the component of multifamily housing is going to be inherent as a part of that complementary discussion.
Again, I kind of want to also go into tune what Mark's saying. I thought the direction was to focus on the missing middle, and there was a particular conversation where we said you have single family here and you have apartments here. We want to be here. So that was also my understanding of the steering committee in regards to the focus is here,
Yes.
not apartments, because technically we just banned them. And
Correct.
they're-
Well,
That's-
it was and Richard and I are both part of that steering committee, and it was just the introductory session.
Who is on the steering committee?
Hmm?
Who's all on the steering committee?
I mean, left to right, that would be, starting across the room, Rob Presley, Andrew Lineberger, 2 of our police officers, AARP representative, Cynthia Hagler, Matt Hart, our Belmont Housing Authority representative, Jennifer and John Church, myself,
And there's one lady from Charlotte.
and yourself. Oh, Ramona Holloway is
Ramona
on the
Holloway.
board on that.
As
steering
well as
committee.
Anna Young, who wasn't able to make it the other night.
Is Anna on that?
That's-
Okay.
But
Well, hold
Wow.
on.
Those people have a professional
Vested interest in high density development. How is
I can probably
this?
save you 6 months right now and tell you what you're going to come back with.
Exactly. What's the purpose of the steering committee?
Well, one of the questions I did want to ask and intend to ask when we met again is who populated this committee? Because it does seem to be slanted
I mean,
very
most
much.
of those people don't even live here. Well, not most. Several of those people do not even live here.
I'm actually very uncomfortable with that, to say that. the least.
Sure. So I would be happy to take suggestions. The thought was to have representation from a variety of different industries. And so we have representation from those who develop real estate. The thought was to intentionally have representation from someone who lives within the Reed community to represent affordable housing, and to have someone from the Housing Authority that represents affordable housing, AARP, which represents the changing market demand for the senior population. And so if there are any representatives that you feel would be a good fit or addition to the board or steering committee, we'd be happy to invite them. Again, it was just an introductory conversation. And so staff was, I'll tell you, I will go on record and say staff worked as a team to try to identify those members. But again, admittedly, we're happy to invite any additional.
Well, the only
Voices
observation
to the room.
that I would make, I was going to say to the committee, but I'll share it with you now. I did not know Anna Young was on it. Okay, because I said, we've got a committee here where, I mean, we don't have a profit motive as councilmen in this. We've got 4 or 5 or 6 people with a direct profit motive, many of which don't live here, making a decision or tendering a recommendation that's going to impact the population here. And what I was struck by is we don't have citizens here. The people who are going to have to live under and be subject to whatever ruling or recommendation that might be adopted. That's the one thing I say is it was the absence of the public. I mean, when we identify stakeholders, we seem to go to the same pool and dip in and pull out the same fish over and over again, but we don't seem to put the people, you know, have people, I would suggest in the future, maybe people who are interested and just randomize it, dump all their names in a bucket and randomly pull the citizenry. Because if you don't, I can populate the citizenry one way or the other. I can find you people that want this or that want that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think the inclusion of like the ARP and
I think that's fine.
the
That's,
partner
that's not what I have an
agencies,
issue
Yeah,
with.
it's going to be difficult for me to take any recommendation from that group seriously when they're all financially invested in one particular outcome.
I don't
In the future,
disagree
we'll
with
make sure
what
we
you
only
just.
appoint people that you all agree with.
That's not necessarily the point, but Richard, I don't necessarily agree with, or excuse me, I don't disagree with what you said is making it randomized in regards to public, or putting this in the public, getting interest, have people come through it, and then do a lottery system or something to make it completely randomized. I feel like it's quite one-sided, in my opinion, just based off of what I've seen in the year and a half or what 2 years I've been on council so far.
Yeah, I
the
mean, I'm
group
not
that's
opposed
involved.
to like necessarily having a bunch of home builders on the
Agreed.
board if they're also balanced out by people who are not home builders.
Correct. There was a group that they did the statue over there in front of the courthouse, and they brought in two sides as well. Granted, completely different thing.
I'm not sure I'd use that as a
But
measuring
it's
stick,
a
considering how that turned out.
but it's an issue with two sides in the Gaston County that's been done before, and they were able to work together, and it was quite productive. To where it's saying, you know, let's do this or let's do that. And I'm saying productive in the context of how they were able to work together, not in regards to where they came and finished or how they got there or whatever, but something similar to that. I'm not talking about that particularly issue, Jim, just as in how they dealt with that issue.
Sure, and again, I would be very interested to reach out to anyone who you feel like can help to better inform or balance that conversation. The goal wasn't to try to make it one way or the other, but just to put in context, the goal was to find people that had some knowledge of the industry itself, because specifically this committee isn't identifying the locations where those housing types are best suited. That would be done through the comprehensive land use plan update. Specifically, this working group is targeted with the creation and introduction of additional housing types into the code, and then us to take those types and then figure out where do they fit in our city. And so the outcome of this would not actually be directly to say, okay, well, we need to have more of this and we need to allow it everywhere. The scope of this work group is rather limited in just identifying which housing types as a community we feel like fit into the fabric of Belmont, and then crafting the language to our land development code for that, letting the comprehensive land use plan and the public input for the community as a whole drive the specific locations and application of those types that have been identified.
let me just ask you, 'cause I guess I got confused somewhere along the line. We were looking when we took the apartments out of the zoning types, except for the boulevard, to introduce the missing middle, which is what we're talking about.
That's correct.
I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting here, but I'm saying, are we, in some cases, we're trying to reintroduce the apartment form type?
So these are two different directives that staff has received from City Council. One is to work with the work group on missing middle. And so that is what the working group is doing in conjunction with the leadership of Central Lina. This directive was to find a path forward or evaluate whether or not there was a path forward to allow for projects, senior housing projects, supportive housing projects, to come before council, not for automatic approval, but for consideration, to have the opportunity to present them for you. And the form is apartments in that case. And I would say, in terms of my experience, and my experience is not the only experience, but a lot of times when groups are trying to offer senior housing, affordable housing, things like that, that are housing for a specific service-oriented or specific type of resident, those tend to utilize the apartment building form. And so that's why I'm saying this is a different direction that staff felt City Council had given after the culmination of, I believe it was the April City Council meeting. So this is a separate text amendment.
Tiffany, we've had our house for years. We had renters in there, people that paid some stuff to us. And also, we've had a lot of problems with them, too. Some students, one girl's cat got it up in her computer and ruined the computers. Just terrible. But we don't want to do that anymore. We just don't want to. And my thing is on the map here, but I don't want to do that.
Sure. And so this, again, this text amendment that I'm seeking direction on is specifically, do we want to move forward with a text amendment that allows this council to consider projects that bring projects for your consideration that include senior supportive housing and or bring apartments and or density to your center city core? And I think to understand the goals of the council as it relates to the methodology, right? So we know that council has heard the downtown visioning plan. That's not an adopted plan, but seem to have some interest in what it would take to move that plan forward. That plan is located in the Center City Small Area Plan. Currently, that plan, if it was filed today, would not be able to be supported by staff. The same is true of the current application in for the senior apartments and or assisted living facility at the Park Street United Methodist Church. And so staff is prepared and has advised both teams that the current position would allow them to file but would not allow them to proceed with staff support because it does not comply with the code. But understanding that council has expressed some interest in trying to find a path forward for both of those applications, we're just seeking some direction and understanding of whether or not there's interest, and if so, the path to proceed to allow for that to move forward.
Basically, what you're proposing tonight, I don't know if anybody else has seen it before, but I mean, for me, I'm going to find it difficult to give you direction tonight. I might need a little bit more time to digest those two options.
Sure.
I mean, are you looking for something tonight from us?
I will take direction as timely as you would like to provide it to me, but I am at a point where before I use too much more of staff's time, I do want to make sure I'm going in the direction that council would like to see us proceed.
So my thought on this, just sort of my initial blush, you could almost use, I don't know how you'd structure this in an ordinance, I'm just thinking out loud here. You could almost use the traffic counts as like an incentive for the sorts of housing we'd want to get. So you could say, like, you know, if you're going to do, assuming this is legal, I don't know. If you want to do senior housing, you know, you're allowed X percent of the 220, wherever it went. The, you know, multifamily housing low rise is usually X. We don't allow X, but if you do senior housing, you're allowed to do X percent or Y percent of X or something like that. Same thing for like affordable housing with income limits. So you're saying like you can't do apartments because they generate so much traffic, but you're allowed a certain level of traffic if your housing is of a certain type. Does that make sense?
And that's really what this option is reflecting, is staff has heard that one of the concerns with apartment building forms and or apartment uses or multifamily uses is the thought of a certain number or density of units on one parcel, right? And that relates to traffic and the cars generated. And so to try to craft a text amendment that would address that by saying, you know, here's the concern with what we typically see of the apartment building forms or multifamily uses. However, there are specific uses within those forms that don't have the same concern, right? In terms of they don't put as many cars on our road. They don't create quite as much congestion for our residents. And that's specifically based on the services that they provide and or the clientele that they attract. And so we would certainly want to work hand in hand with parks to make sure that any text amendment we put forward would be legal. That would be primary in terms of the goal. But that would be what staff is proposing here, is to really have it focused on what we heard voiced, which was concerns about density related to traffic.
Are we able just to exclude senior apartment living from what's currently passed in the text amendment?
You cannot, from my understanding, allow housing for one people type.
Even
And
though
not
it would
other people
classify
types.
as affordable housing?
We,
Well,
Parks, I will
are we
defer
already-
to you on this, but I don't think that we can,
Are we not already doing that with Del Webb when you talk about people type? Where we've created a whole subdivision where if you
Deed
are
restricted.
There's a
That's
federal,
all privately,
and
the
it's,
HOA, I think.
right, and it's
does that.
conditional zoning, and
Okay.
so it was a voluntary agreement.
Though in theory, an apartment building would be owned by someone, which would then, I guess you could, because you'd have like a condo owners association or something, or whoever actually owns the building, I suppose, that could control usage in that way, similar to the way that Del Webb is controlling who comes into their community.
but it's the form that's the problem.
Right, right
It
now the
doesn't
form
matter if
itself.
you did that, it wouldn't be allowed because the form is not permitted in that district.
Right, so
What triggers the apartment form? Is it how many units, how the height?
no, anything 3 units and greater is an apartment building form in Belmont.
3 units.
Correct,
So you can't even do a quadplex.
that's correct.
And Del Webb, you can't rent anything out there. Short term, you can do it.
That's going to be up to their individual homeowner communities. State law does not allow the planning department to regulate ownership versus renting.
I think you could rent out Del Webb.
They may have private covenant restrictions, but it wasn't a condition of the conditional zoning because we are bound to not regulate that.
But could you say, like, for example, the apartment form is permitted if traffic counts are like, for example, if you did 25% normal multifamily, that would allow you, in theory, to do a, plain vanilla sort of affordable housing senior type based on this chart that I'm looking at, because it says it comes in at like 18%. So I mean, could you do something like that?
Where you have a threshold of how much under
Yeah,
that
like,
land use it has to
yeah,
be.
like you could say, like, the apartment building form is permitted in situations where the traffic count is like 25% of this IFE standard.
Sure.
Or
So
ITE.
that was actually one of the things that staff was thinking about. We can certainly try to figure out where that exact threshold would be. But one thing that we have found is that sometimes when we're looking at housing, development is broad and they respond to market demand, right? And so sometimes what you'll see is a mix of market rate units with senior units, or a mix of market rate units with affordable units, right? And then other times you'll see an entire project that is specified to one user type or one housing type. And so we can certainly take that approach and set a threshold. Or we can say, look, if you're below the typical threshold, utilizing any mix or combination of senior or supportive housing types, if you're below the threshold, you could go before city council. And as city council, you can provide direction of where you'd like to see that target, how much lower you'd like to see that target, and staff could work with the applicant to try to craft a proposal for your consideration that targets that. But if it's a 79 or an 80% just based off the unit counts and the proportionality, we can certainly set that. But I thought maybe the easier approach would be to present an option that would allow you all to really target what you want to see here in our community by having those projects come before you for your consideration. So you can weigh the merits of all of them. A lot of times with our developments, I'll say this, sometimes when they come to staff, we may see merits about the site that we would like to discuss further, but if the staff can't support conversations like that, things like right-of-way for future transportation improvements that we might want to work with the developer on. And that happened with Smith Farm, where we got additional right-of-way allowed for the future widening of South Point Road, right? Those are things that we can incorporate into plans when we're able to work with the development community to bring them before you as city council for you to ultimately decide yes or no. And so that's why I'm proposing that maybe anything below the threshold we allow as an opportunity to at least have you all review and consider, as we don't know where these might pop up. I know where one is currently filed. And as I said, it's at the corner of Keener and Catawba. Where other ones might have interest, I'm not sure. But I
But
know
you
that
can't
transportation.
zone, we can't zone, isn't that spot zoning if we zone particularly for one specific use in mind or one specific application?
We do.
In the old days, right now you've got apartments only on Wilkins. One idea that had come across at the beginning was to expand that area on a limited basis to include the corridor from Wilkins to the top, or the eastern side of the corridor. I mean, that would be just a simple way to address that one project, but that doesn't fix the citywide. I mean, in fairness, you need to do something citywide, which is being explored. But that was just mandate.
And I will say, conditional zoning isn't considered spot zoning from my understanding, and Parks, please let me know and jump in, if it is also consistent with the vision outlined in your comprehensive land use plan, right? And so if we were, wrong direction.
We're going back to the
We don't want to go back to that conversation. But if we look at the maps here, we can see that our comprehensive land use plan, regardless of which option we do, envisions specific things within a center city core. And there's an entire chapter of what does the center city core look like, right? That it should be walkable. So if we kept the zoning until somebody that's in place today, until somebody came before requesting reconsideration or conditional zoning, my understanding is that that wouldn't be spot zoning if what they were requesting was consistent with the vision as outlined in our comprehensive land use plan.
Oh, here we go. The only thing I have with, just side note, and it's just more of a statement, when we keep referencing the comprehensive land use plan, is that this is currently, hopefully, being redone, right, in the next year, towards the end of this year, early next year. And again, I just want to make the statement that I do believe that it might still be outdated versus what some of the current citizens currently believe and where densities should be put.
Committee had a hand in the development of that.
Well, what I'll say on the comp plan is I just want to make sure that we're transparent in terms of timing. And so based off of current staff capacity, it is not likely that we will be able to start with a consultant on the comprehensive land use plan update until January of 2024. That could take a year to year and a half. Let's say on a best case, it takes a year. We're still looking at an update of the comprehensive land use plan at 2025. And so it's what we have in place. All that being said, one of the things that I want to work closely with Parks on as we move forward towards any text amendment is that based off of state statute and General Statutes 160D, when we adopt text amendments that don't appear to be in alignment with our comprehensive land use plan, it automatically updates our comprehensive land use plan. So legislation is not clear on exactly what that update looks like, other than the intent behind the update is supposed to effectively update our comprehensive land use plan. And so I would need to look at, because there's no guidance on specifically how it impacts this map, right? But we know the vision has changed based off of the most recent decisions. And so we'd want to make sure we understand how to apply that moving forward with either text amendment that we bring before you.
Martha's pondering.
But when we hit pause on this, we were concerned, my way of thinking, that we were going to get too many apartments, too much density. So if we go to conditional zoning, then this group is going to have to make that decision for every different project, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that still gives us control. It's a matter of if you think and we think the parking situation or the senior housing is appropriate, we're going to still get to say. So I don't know whether that's enough to make the group not more stay on pause for this. I think that's where it
Which
comes
is-
down for me.
Which is what we had before we changed it, conditional zoning.
That is correct. So before the recent text amendment, all projects would come to you through the conditional zoning project. Any multifamily would come to you. The difference was now specifically in the apartment building form. And so we wanted to make sure that either option we presented for your consideration tonight respected the decision that was made in January, but allowed for a different approach with this new text amendment being envisioned. But yes, it would still be in favor of conditional zoning because we understand that oversight is critical to this conversation.
Well, I mean, I think it makes sense to develop some sort of like matrix or something that sort of visualizes what it is we're comfortable seeing. Because, like, I mean, if somebody just wants to drop an apartment building downtown, I mean, I don't know if there's going to be much support for that on council. I don't want to speak for the council, but that just seems to be kind of the direction we're going. But if it's something that accomplishes, either tackles either affordability or this senior housing option, that seems like it'd be more of a conversation worth having. But I don't know how you write that into the code where you could say, oh, well, you can do apartments if you're going to fill them with a whole bunch of seniors or people who can't afford to pay market rates on their apartments. But I mean, the other thing is that traffic generation tends to be the primary concern about a lot of the apartment development because it's just so much additional load on particularly the roads that are already overloaded. So tying that to the sorts of development that we'd like to see, however you do that, I think makes sense.
Okay.
I know that's...
I agree with what Mark's saying.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to articulate. And it might be tricky, but I think from my perspective, it's worth exploring and seeing if there's some type of way to proceed that way.
I know that, I don't know anything about the specifics, I just remember reading about it in the Observer once, but I know Charlotte's got some sort of program where they give like a density bonus for
Correct.
affordable housing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about here is like, except maybe do it with traffic counts somehow.
Sure. So it's almost, I'll need to craft maybe a different wording or approach, as it sounds like the direction is to not give a bonus for density, but in fact to only allow density in cases where it helps us to achieve our larger housing goals.
I think that's accurate.
Okay.
Which would be affordable housing and senior living.
Senior
in
housing.
this
And I would
situation.
say the other market that is really important to our community and isn't necessarily important to all communities is some of our special needs housing.
Yeah.
Right? And,
Yes.
and,
True.
and
Yeah.
we have, that's why I wanted to make sure that we were crafting this conversation not specific to just seniors, but also supportive housing of all different varieties, because our community is unique and celebrated because of our diversity in how we support people of all walks of life. And so I want to make sure that regardless of the option, was able to be incorporated into this. So traffic focus is what I'm hearing in terms of direction, but we're not sure exactly what that looks like, but work with parks to make sure whatever the approach is legal. Is that a good summary?
I agree with it. Richard, Jim, Martha?
It's fine.
I have to wait to see what it looks like. Again, it's the first time I'm seeing it. I mean, I guess in some way, on some level, in theory, I agree with it, but the devil's going to be in the details.
Oh, absolutely. And staff's prepared to work to try to draft up those details, but we wanted to make sure we were proceeding on the right road before we did that.
Let me ask you, I mean, just to game out a scenario that occurs to me, if you're gonna do this on traffic base and I'm a developer and I'm looking at the language, I say, how do I get around this? Okay, so I'm gonna develop 100 units live workspace and make the case that these people aren't gonna drive. Whether they will or not is purely speculative.
Well, I think the advantage of tying it to these standards is that they're like national standards. So like, Mr. Big Shot developer just can't come in and be like, oh, well, it's a live work, so they're never going to drive anywhere. There's going to be like a live work category or something in here that says, actually, it's going to generate this amount.
Correct.
Trips.
So these are the same national standards that are applied and utilized in all of our TIA documentation. So that's why it was a kind of a lead to say, well, let's use this as a starting point, right? At the end of the day, there's the traffic analysis, and then if it's coming back to you all for review, there's ultimately discretion, right? Do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you think they did enough? Do you not? A lot of these projects, if they're coming in an apartment building form, they don't have to. It depends on the number of units proposed, but they may trigger also a transportation impact analysis where you would have a little bit more detail and data to be able to help inform your decision making.
Are you capping the number of units? I mean, you've got 100 there because I think that's what Park Street's asked for. Is that just a working number, or is that the cap?
No, there's no cap because every site is different. Again, multifamily right now in terms of our definitions goes as low as 3 and up until however many. But we just felt like 100 was a good round number to be able to utilize and help us with percentages. And so we just wanted to offer something as an example for talking tonight.
Is the board aware of any other jurisdictions that have used the traffic focus matrix?
I do not know that they are, but I haven't asked the question to be fair.
You all should get some slack.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tiffany. Appreciate that.
Do we need to go into closed session now, or?
About the Parks and Rec Center opening is tomorrow. So I have two questions. First of all, I did not get a response. I'm assuming everybody is okay with us doing the park naming for Trevor Gray, because I want to say something about that. Does anybody have a problem? Okay. The other thing, does everybody want to say something? In other words, we're talking about a minute or two. We're not talking about long-winded at the opening. In other words, Charlie would certainly welcome everybody, but do all of us want to say something at the center opening?
It's tomorrow, right?
No, July 8th.
July 8th.
July 8th. Okay. Yeah, so we just want, I mean, I'm sorry, Wednesday, yeah. But if we won't meet again.
Wait, what's Wednesday?
This coming Wednesday is the last meeting of the group planning the Park and Rec Center. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I was looking at ahead. So does anybody not want to say something, I guess is what?
I'm going to be out of town.
You're going to be out of town? Okay, so do you want to say something, Alex?
Yeah, I'll yield it. Who wants to extra?
I mean,
No, we're not doing that.
what are y'all going to be directionally saying? I don't want to
No,
say.
all I'm going to say is I'm going to thank Jamie and Laura, and I'm going to say about the skateboard park that I want to mention that because the Parks and Rec board dropped the ball on doing this about 8 or 9 months ago, and I want it finished up before at the same time.
Like an official christening or something for it. That would make more sense.
Well, we may later, but I think it's way past time to go ahead and make the at least announce
You
it.
mean just get
That's
the
it.
champagne bottle and hit it up against the side of it?
Is it a ship?
Yeah. Okay.
When I hear christening,
okay.
I'm thinking.
So, Jim, do you want to say anything then?
Well, if Richard's going to say something, I'm going to.
Okay, all right. So everybody's going to be
then
here.
yes, I will.
Okay,
say
we'll deal with it. Okay, thank you. That's all I need to know. Thanks. Yes.
So
Okay.
we've got a Parks and Rec Citizen Advisory Board budget is going to speak. Donnie Loftus has indicated he wants to say something.
Well, we'll tell them their time is limited.
Oh, this is good. That's out the window.
So
Mhm.
we're trying to keep it under 10 minutes
Mhm.
because people are going to be standing there and then we're going to get all of you guys together and cut the ribbon.
Right.
Can we filter it all through Charlie? Just all of us put our comments down on a piece of paper and let Charlie say it, if he feels comfortable with that.
Do it now.
I think that's putting a lot of pressure on him.
Okay.
Yeah. So 1 minute. That's it. One
Okay.
minute. 1 minute.
They all say it. I'll
1
say
minute.
some stuff.
Okay, that tells me
Sound
direction.
like a
Thank
Chinese
you. That's all I
restaurant.
need.
10 minutes. 1 minute.
1 minute.
That answered my question.
Okay. So now we're ready to go to get all these.
Let's see.
Motion to go into close.
Close.